that the officers spend a third of their time writing reports.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe that.
They are running ragged out there, oftentimes just with barely enough to kind of get by managing the calls they have to do and all these administrative tasks that are even beyond the actual report writing, which a lot of people don't truly understand until they see it up front.
If a sergeant's out in the field, things are so much better. Having sergeants out in the field is excellent.
Yeah.
And if a sergeant's whole life is just reading and shooting back reports, they're not out in the field as much.
Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. Today we're talking about AI, this huge topic prevalent in our world today in society and technology. AI is very much here with policing, and there's a lot of different responses to it. But I have Daniel here with Abel Police, and we're going to be talking about what Abel does and what his take on all that is. So Daniel, without further ado, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah, appreciate it. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about Abel Police?
Sure. Yeah, I'm an engineer. I've been an engineer for 10 years. I live in San Francisco. I previously had built and sold a fitness app, and then I worked for Elon Musk on his Twitter transition team. And it was during that time that I decided I hadn't worked with Elon. I'd become friends with Elon, but I hadn't worked with him before. And seeing how Elon approaches work to me was interesting because everything to him is, if he's working on it, it's life or death. And that makes it really easy for him to make decisions. It makes trade-offs really clear. I was running a fitness app at the time that was I decided I needed to do something better. And in parallel with those events, a friend of mine reached out to me that I hadn't talked to in years and said she needed help. She had met a guy, married him, and he had started hitting her. And she had a son with him. And she needed help and needed to get out. So I basically helped her escape this situation physically, and then went through the long and arduous process of helping her escape it financially and legally.
Yeah.
And part of that was helping her get an apartment, and I helped her get an apartment in Oakland. And her husband figured out where she was living. It turns out a restraining order is just a piece of paper, and he would come over and be banging on the door, threatening to kill her. Mm-hmm. She was inside with her son. And so, yeah, it was in this experience that I really had the first brush with I had met police as a kid, but it was my first actual serious business with police.
Yeah, for sure.
Oakland PD, which is a agency that faces a lot of challenges, would take, on average, this happened 3 times, on average about 45 minutes to get out there. I was born and raised in Florida. Police there, always well-funded, and whenever you need them. I remember I was a kid, my dad's phone number started with 910, and I accidentally dialed 911. And one time from the home phone, and immediately, 911, what's your emergency? And I was like, oh, hang up. And 5 minutes later, there's 2 officers at the door just making sure everything's okay. And that's what the police were like when I was a kid. That's just what I always thought police were everywhere. I thought that was basic expectation. And so seeing it out here, I realized it's not like that. And so I started talking to the police. The OPD officers were really apologetic, and they're, we're really shorthanded, and we've got a lot of things we have to do. I'm sorry about this. So I started finding out that there's a massive shortage of police now since 2020. And then I started diving into what police actually spend their time doing. And it turns out they spend a third of their time. I found the 2021 staffing analysis from the SFPD, and it said that the officers spend a third of their time writing reports.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that. I can't believe it. I don't think there's any job where, unless you're an accountant or a lawyer, where you spend a third of your time writing reports. That's insane. So,
or a writer, maybe, right?
Yeah, I mean, if your job is to write reports, okay, but if your job is not explicitly to write reports, it's just a surprise gotcha they get when they join the force. That's crazy.
A little bit sometimes.
So I've been an engineer for a long time. I have a lot of friends that work at OpenAI and Anthropic and these other AI labs. So I started talking to them, and we basically stood up a demo stack to interpret body cam video and turn that into basic police narratives and reports. And then from there, I was able to get funding, and I was able to get my first agency to sign on to help me develop it, which was Richmond across the bay from San Francisco.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate you sharing that why. I mean, why and the purpose is such a critical part of why people become first responders, and ultimately for civilians that interact with public safety. And you very much are doing that with Able Police. So I appreciate that personal call in to help you realize this huge gap and this huge challenge, and then flip it into an opportunity, right? So we talk about, and we often joke about how much time it takes to write, and many people that want to be cops, like, yeah, maybe you hear this, yes, stay out of trouble, stay in school, and kind of do all the things. But you're right. A lot of applicants have no idea until they go into the testing process, go into the hiring process, and learn how much of their day is writing about what they did with their day, which you're absolutely right. It cuts down on how much cops can be out in the street, answering calls, looking out for proactive opportunities to stop or hinder or deter crime, which is ultimately what most of the public wants, right? They'd prefer to have police officers around to address the problems that emerge.
Absolutely. I think the best police force is everyone is on default standby and ready to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're default standby, and either they are doing self-initiated stops or they are responding to calls for service as they come in, but the call board is clear. That is obviously the best situation.
That'd be amazing, yeah.
Yeah, and especially out here on the West Coast, it is not like that at all.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, I feel that. I'm outside of Seattle, and although the staffing impact is very much a real thing, and I came into and out of recruiting, between 2021 and 2023, and luckily we made a lot of strides in that effort. But even so, a lot of my officers on boots on the ground, a lot of my team are kind of like, man, like all it takes is someone to, have a kid and someone to be out sick, and then you're back under, your optimal staffing. And even when you're optimally staffed, there's so many things that just brew up. There's the times when it's very manageable, and then there's times where it feels very unattainable. And so, such a critical thing. So when we talk about AI use for report writing, a lot of people get really excited and a lot of people get a little apprehensive. What can you say about, obviously you're not revealing to all your competitors, but what sets Able Police apart in how that's helping officers build these case narratives?
Yeah, I'd say we have two big differentiators. One of them is that we actually do visual analysis. So we're not just taking your transcripts, we're actually comprehending the action on the screen.
Mhm.
We're able then to describe subjects. We're able to describe the actions they take. This is really, really important, obviously,
Yeah.
for report writing. And the second half of it is that we generate face sheets as well as narratives. And so we have integration built out for Mark 43. And with Mark 43, there's a little button that appears in the bottom right if you have Able. And you can click on it, you can go to your videos, and there's different sections. And we have a section persons. And you can, from there, insert a person. It opens up the person, it inserts all the information into the fields for you.
Mm.
You can review it and click save. This is hundreds of clicks that officers do when they're filling out a report. And the other solutions, any other solution I've seen, just does a narrative. The narrative is important, of course, and we really strive to write what we call a 95th percentile narrative, a very, very high quality narrative that's tailored for the individual type of crime or the individual incident that we're dealing with. But on top of that, getting the structured data in is a second massive time saver. And it's also a massive improvement in data quality for the entire organization.
Hmm.
I began realizing when I started talking to detectives that patrol officers are not particularly great oftentimes about filling in the structured fields that they have to fill in.
This is true. This is true.
And I hesitate because I'm sympathetic, because I've done a ton of ride-alongs now with Richmond, and I know what it's like to, I've gone on shifts and the officer I'm with got held over, and I hold over with them, and I go home after 15 or 16 hours. And that's when you really understand what being a cop is like, is when you do 15 or 16 hours of it. But I get it. At the end of your shift, you're not worried about updating phone numbers. You're not, really paying attention to event statistics that you're supposed to be ticking off. I 100% get that. Uh, that's why there should be a tool that interprets what's going on and does that busy work for you. Gives you a great structure, a great first draft of narrative as well. And then you can fill in your police intuitions, your observations, your experience with this individual person, etc., to make the narrative completely whole. And then from that, you get an incredible police report that you then can send to the DA.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned it. Oh, one, like I said, shout out for riding with officers. I think when people develop technology or tools or resources and they don't have the context, it leaves a gap. But for you to go in the cars
Mm-hmm.
with multiple officers and see the work and see and recognize the challenge, right? It's not for a lack of caring, but it is oftentimes juggling so many things and wanting to get back out there, or as you said, holding over, and people are fatigued. And so whether they fill in every space and whether they fill it in accurately, that becomes a thing, right? And so we'll get into
Mm-hmm.
that more later. But yeah, as an officer, oftentimes it was just fill out the red mandatory fields. I'm not trying to give people ideas, but this is how I felt. And then being a supervisor, getting seeing both sides. Sometimes it's like, man, how do we keep missing these mandatory fields where I have to kick it back or records department has to kick it back, and or hey, there's all these other fields, although it's not mandatory. This is how we link people to crimes. This is how we link associates and all these other things. But at the same time, you get it because they are running ragged out there, oftentimes just with barely enough to kind of get by managing the calls they have to do and all these administrative tasks that are even beyond the actual report writing, which a lot of people don't truly understand until they see it up front.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So with the narratives, that is intriguing that it takes visual, right, analysis and builds this narrative. Now, I know that for a lot of people that sounds really appealing, and like I made a nod to, there are some people that are worried about accuracy and they're worried about officers essentially perjuring themselves because they're just going to have this report written up, and then cops being cops are going to be like, all right, cool, that's actually more detailed than I would have put. On to the next one, approve it. What are some of your thoughts or some of the, I suppose, navigation that you and your team have helped along with that challenge?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because Richmond's actually a really great agency for us to start with. And if people don't know, Richmond, California is north of Berkeley, north of Oakland, the East Bay of San Francisco. It's got about 3 times the murder rate of California, so it's kind of a spicy place.
Mm,
But uh, the police agency, the Richmond PD, is excellent, and it's a great place for me to start. But it made me expect too much of other agencies. So I started seeing quickly in Richmond. I would see that there's a really strong report writing culture. Uh,
mm,
they're very intense about it. There's the FTO for report writing is a gentleman named John Platzner, and he takes it very seriously, and I can see that throughout the organization. And the result is that when we generate narratives from Abel, I watch the officers review it. They take it very seriously because they know it'll get bounced back by the sergeants if it violates agency policy, if it's missing any element of a crime, anything like this. So
yeah.
as a result, in Richmond, I never thought about the problem of officers rubber stamping because every time I see an officer use our product, they would sit there studiously reviewing it. One of them said that Able takes 45-minute reports and it turns it into 10-minute reports.
Man.
And when he said that, my heart sank because originally I wanted to go from 45 minutes to 0 minutes. And I was like, oh, we still got to spend
Mm.
10 minutes. But now I'm like,
Oh, I was
now I get
impressed
it.
by that number. Yeah, I
Yes,
love I
yeah,
love
you're
your hunger,
impressed.
man. Yeah.
And to me, that was too low. But now I think to myself, 10 minutes is probably right. 10
Mm.
minutes is how long I want him to spend. I want him to look at it. All the structure of what occurred is already filled out. If there are any discrepancies, one thing we do is we put timestamps that are clickable throughout the narrative so that they click on it, it goes to that part of the video. So it's very easy for them to go and review
Oh,
anything
yeah.
that they might not remember clearly or they might disagree with. So they can do that. Seeing the officers use it, I was like, okay, that won't be a problem. Going to other agencies, I realized a lot of agencies, they have some agencies are in chaos. Some agencies are so interesting to me because maybe it's a place where the chief left in a scandal and half the officers left and they had to hire a bunch of laterals. And
Yeah,
now the
never happened
report
before,
writing,
right?
yeah, now the report
You know
writing,
police culture, man. Yeah, you know us.
the report writing now there is a whole mess because it's like a mishmash of different laterals. I've been to agencies in the Phoenix area where they've blown up. The agency has tripled in size in 3 years, and they've got people have been on the force for 3 years. They've been officers for 3 years, and they're getting promoted to sergeant. Just crazy stuff like that. And so the report writing is sort of in chaos. And when I see that, I realize, okay, we have to do something to make sure that this rubber stamp problem doesn't happen. I don't want anyone to Brady themselves using this.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
absolutely my biggest concern. And so there's a couple strategies for this. And one of our general approach is that we leave it up to agencies and we give them options.
Hmm.
And one strategy is the random sentence strategy. You insert random sentences that are totally unrelated within the report. If you haven't reviewed it as an officer, makes it very clear that you haven't reviewed it to the sergeant, right?
Mm.
Makes it very obvious. And so that's one thing that is, I think, a pretty good strategy. Another thing is to actually surface to the sergeant the diff. Here's what he inserted. Here's what he submitted.
Oh,
And if it's a zero character diff, that's pretty suspicious too,
yeah.
frankly. We're working on some more products,
Hmm.
and I won't go too much into it, but helping sergeants review is a whole different space. And I think that opens up a lot of opportunity for us to understand how officers are handling their narratives. So
Hmm.
there's a few tools that we can use right now, but they seem like blunt tools to me because I don't want to give people a worse product. I don't want to give officers worse narratives that have random erroneous facts in it. I want to give them the absolute best, but I also want to make sure that they are adding their bit. So we've got tools right now. We've got more coming.
Yeah, no, I love that. You hit on a lot of things, Daniel, and one of them is kind of highlighting this notion, right? You could have whatever policy, program, tech, resource, tool, but it's going to accelerate or enhance what you have, right? So you made a nod to Richmond, right? Having this fantastic report quality culture. Like that's a cultural tenet that they take really seriously and they have that built into their training and how people put their work product out, right? So having a tool like Abel has only strengthened that is what I hear, right? But if
Mhm.
you have a culture that doesn't review their stuff, they put out inconsistent quality and there's all these different styles and supervision isn't consistent with what they want, then you're going to get inconsistent results. And so I think that is a very healthy thing to focus on, that a lot of that is incumbent on us as officers, supervisors, leaders, and organizational culture, right? Us as a team, like how we utilize this. And I like the examples that you provided on how to curb a lot of the potential challenges, being that like, hey, you have to fact check this, and here's a couple things to make it really hard to avoid. Even the difference. I love how even an officer looking at a report should be able to say that is accurate. However, I would even describe it this way, and they add a little bit or they curb it. So having a supervisor be able to see that there's no change is absolutely, in my eyes, a very valuable tool.
Yeah, I think the more we can surface, the more that we can align people. When you're 15 hours into a shift, you probably have different preferences than you might have when you're fresh, when you just woke up. Maybe
Hmm.
you just woke up and you just went to court, and now you're sitting in the stand. And suddenly you have kind of different preferences than you had when you wrote this report six
For
months
sure.
ago and you were 15 hours into a shift. I want to align those two people.
Hmm.
I want to make sure that the officer who is 15 hours into a shift is aligned, his preferences are aligned with the officer on the stand 6 months later. And using technology to make sure that those two are aligned, to make sure that one officer in this situation, the one 6 months before, doesn't screw over the officer that's the same guy who's sitting on the stand 6 months
Yeah,
later.
yeah.
That's my goal. If we can use technology to do that, that's huge.
Yeah, it's funny. There's memes about that. Like, why did nighttime guy ruin, sabotage daytime guy, right? Like, why did you do this to me, nighttime guy? But that is the thing, right? You get called in and you're fatigued, and we have to be practical in recognizing the difference in work quality. And oftentimes, it is a very humbling experience. Our first couple times getting called into court and testifying, or maybe you dodged one because you read your report before preparing, and you're like, oh my gosh, how did I write so little, or how is this the case that gets called in? And then the defendant pleads out or they rolled in with something else. You're like, oh, thank goodness, right? I do want to take a moment to circle back to that sergeant, that supervisor review component. I love that you were talking about that because oftentimes for supervisors, for first lines, it is a lot of that kind of running ragged too, right? Your officers are out in the street. And now these days, especially with a larger department like mine, and certainly all kinds, small, large, whatever, they are strapped having to be out trying to contact officers, trying to train them. Right? We have a really young industry these days because of all the attrition that you recognize and you saw, that manifested in Oak. So supervisors are spending so much time reviewing things, but they really ought to be out with their people. And so they get pulled in multiple directions. And oftentimes I see, and I felt this too, where you're reviewing case reports, you're often reviewing for the big, really important, critical things that should stand out to you, like probable cause. Did we have probable cause to arrest or cite this person? A lot of times it's almost like, how do you find something that's not there, absent a checklist, and every case is so different. And so all to say, I can see how having technology on your side to look for things could be very effective and helpful, because a supervisor otherwise is just looking, at content, which is, written so differently per every officer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a few things that reports really need, and probable cause is one of them. Elements of the crime is another. Making sure we comply with agency policies is another. And all of these, when they are present, make a much stronger report, and it makes it much more likely that the bad guy goes to jail.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my goal. Having
And
seen
stays
bad
there, right?
guys,
Yeah.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
having seen bad guys up close, and having seen how terrifying it is for a victim, I now am very determined to make sure we write the absolute best reports possible. And so part of it is saving time, but then the other half of it is, what does the DA get?
Mm.
What is their perception of it? How seriously are they going to take it? If they get, 4 lines and it's a use of force, then that's a very tough situation for the DA.
Yes, that's not good.
If you're going to charge a serious felony and it's half a paragraph, that's not going to fly. And I feel like that's a huge weakness right now. But also what you're talking about, having sergeants in the field, a lot of people don't realize most people don't realize anything about policing, but a big thing from my observation, I've done now 22 ride-alongs with Richmond. And a big thing is when something's going to happen, like we kind of circle up, we meet in the McDonald's parking lot or whatever. We're going to serve this warrant, or, there's this situation where we all group together. The sergeant shows up, it's so much better. If a sergeant's out in the field, things are so much better. Having sergeants out in the field is excellent.
Yeah.
And if a sergeant's whole life is just reading and shooting back reports, they're not out in the field as much. So I think the thing that we can do to really improve policing and to make sure that things go better in the field is freeing up sergeants to be in the field, freeing them up from really onerous paperwork. If they have a tool that helps them with that, I would like to build that. That's important.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a force multiplier, right? You have this other hat that's, one part teacher, one part facilitator, coordinator. So much better to curb things a positive, constructive, effective direction while it's happening, rather than after the fact when you read a report and you're like, I have a question. Why did this happen or not happen? Or did it and it's just not written, right? And so much value there.
Absolutely. A sergeant's whole life is finding out about things after the fact. That's not that great.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you seen this where, this is in my mind when we talk about AI for report writing and systems like this, where, for those that are like, man, I don't want to, perjure myself, or officers to perjure themselves, as you've already spoken to really adequately. For me, it's like we're making those mistakes already, right? I've been on the stand and read a report in simple grammar where, the jury saw it, but the defense was also effective in making me look a little sloppy, right? Can you read that line? Oh, do you think that you meant he instead of she, because who are you referencing? And then I have to kind of have hat in hand be like, yes, I believe I did mean that because the paragraph prior was talking about this person, right? Like, it's not a tactic a lot of defense attorneys would typically stoop to, but this one did, and I learned my lesson, right? But that is super common, just to have a little grammatical error where AI can obviously pick that up quicker than we can when we're holding over or we get called in early because of some catastrophe.
Yeah, absolutely. AI is interesting to me because the way that it's used, or the people that use it in the field, and I've done ride-alongs with a lot of agencies, and in the field, I've seen officers using Grammarly
Hmm.
and using ChatGPT.
Hmm.
A lot of times, it's officers who have had enough experience to experience exactly what you're describing, who are the most worried, who really want, who use
Yeah.
these tools.
Hmm.
Which is funny because it's usually in most technological situation, young guys that pick up new tools. If you've ever been on the stand and you've been caught with some stupid grammatical thing, just a simple, misgendering between paragraphs, misunderstanding, it makes a lot of sense that you would use these tools. Now, I want to make absolutely clear, no officer should use ChatGPT or Grammarly because these are not CJIS compliant.
Mm.
When
Yeah.
you use ChatGPT, and if you are command staff and you're listening to this, I guarantee your guys are using ChatGPT. They're using Grammarly. And use ChatGPT, that data goes off to OpenAI, who uses it to train, which means hypothetically, the stuff that they enter can be coming out in somebody else's responses later on.
Mm.
And if you use Grammarly, well, Grammarly is a Ukrainian company. And I hope Ukraine wins that war, but you should not be sending your police reports to Eastern Europe. That is not a good idea.
Yeah.
So currently, your officers are already using AI. You should probably be using CJIS compliant AI.
Yeah. If they're going to be using the tool, let's use the smart tool, the proven, credible tool, right?
Use a tool that actually treats the data like it's important. We've
Hmm.
gone through incredible effort to be CJIS compliant. That's something I didn't know getting into this. And it's kind of funny because obviously I work in tech here in San Francisco. I know lots of people that run startups and this data security specs. The most common one is called SOC 2, and that's for financial data. And the second most common is HIPAA, and that's for, of course, healthcare. And there's lots of tools and lots of companies that will help you become SOC 2 or HIPAA compliant. Nobody helps you become CJIS. Nobody's heard of it.
Mm.
So when you're becoming CJIS compliant, you're on your own. You have to hire a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, which we've had to do, and go through the compliance spec yourself and get it fully compliant. And that is definitely ChatGPT is not CJIS, Grammarly is not CJIS. So these guys are already using this. You should definitely get them off of ChatGPT and Grammarly.
Yeah, that is such a valid point, right? There's just the security of information, and if people are copy and pasting it, like, "Hey, help me clean this up," man, like how much sensitive information, personal information,
Yeah,
victim data, right? And even just process and tactics, some of these things that can get captured that if we're willy nilly because we are running around with our heads cut off, and now we think we're doing the responsible thing of using this tool and cleaning up our work for better work product. Shoot, there's all these downstream effects and consequences that may not have been super apparent to the well-meaning user.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you've covered a lot of the different products, things you have coming on. For those listening, is it its own RMS, its own whole software, or how can people look into integrating your services and products with their agency?
I definitely I got interested in policing and I started reading about record management systems and dispatch systems. And at first, I was like, "Oh, maybe we could build an RMS." And now, no, I would not build an RMS. Building an
It's a
RMS
lot.
is so hard. It's
Hmm.
not a terribly complicated piece of technology, but the problem is that getting an agency to switch record management systems is pulling teeth. It's such a hard sales cycle. So I decided to build something that would integrate with existing record management systems, and that would be way easier. So, yeah, we build, and you can go to ablepolice.com and see more about what we do, but we got an integration with Mark 43. Then we can hook up to your digital evidence management system. However you're storing your video,
Sure.
we automatically poll it is what we do. So we set up, we get access, and then our system polls your digital evidence management every few minutes, looking for new videos. Anything we find, videos or photos, anything we find, we download, we process, we see which officer took it, and we add that to their profile. And then when the officer logs in, they can either do it through the record management system, or if we don't have an integration with that, then they can go through our own website just to get their narratives and any data they want to get. But when they log in, it's sitting there waiting for them. And so in Richmond, a lot of officers now, what they do is they used to write in the field at each incident. Now they just go from they finish their work on an incident and they go to the next one. This makes the call board disappear really quickly. And at the end of their shift, all the reports are sitting there waiting for them. They come in the comfort of the report writing room, the lineup room, and they bang out 5 reports and go home, usually within an hour. So it's a much more, it's nice because it keeps them moving in the field. And then at the end of their shift, just an hour, and then they can leave.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds pretty smooth as far as integration. And it does answer, I think, a lot of people's questions if they are supervisors or command staff they're recognizing exactly what you said, right? It's hard to change these different software platforms or RMS. I mean, shoot, when I hired on, I think we had something that most people felt was pretty outdated, but we were going to keep rolling with it for quite a while because budgets are tight and technology is expensive to start a new contract, and it's got to be all planned and accounted for and get council approval and all these things. So that does sound a lot more tenable. Daniel, I really want to thank you because you're an example of what a lot of people they talk about wanting to do, but it takes so much more than just law enforcement to affect public safety. And this is a perfect example of that. You have your complete different skill set and expertise and insight for innovation. And a personal mantra of mine and one of Blue Grid is really to serve the need. And you recognize this need that was up close and personal, with your people. You saw how public service, how criminal justice was extremely hindered and their abilities were extremely stalled, and you found and built the solution. So I want to thank you for that. I think it's absolutely inspiring to see this in real time, real action. Now, is there anything that you'd like to is there anything that you'd like to leave the listeners with, kind of circling around, and please do share with us how we can learn more, how we can reach out and look at bringing Abel to our police agencies?
Yeah, you can go to Abel Police. It's ABEL, like Cain and Abel. Go to abelpolice.com. We have an intake form. I want to hear, especially to us, early adopter agencies are the agencies that are having the most difficulty. Like I mentioned earlier, kind of like agencies that have chaos. If there's chaos within your agency, that's interesting to me. If people are mad at each other inside your agency, that's interesting to me. Oftentimes when I find people are mad at each other, I find that there's usually a product we can develop for them. And so I'm the CEO and founder, and I'm an engineer, and we're a team of engineers. I like to see, obviously, Abel, we call it Abel Writer, is our main product, but also any other issues that you have, come talk to me. I love talking to cops about their issues.
Intriguing. Yeah. My mind's going a lot of different places. That's super exciting, man. Well, thank you so much for your time, Daniel, and I'm excited to be able to share this out, and I'm sure a lot of people will be reaching out to learn more.
All right, Eric. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.